Hey everyone, it's your girl back again, RDB Speaks, with another episode of Triumph with RDB Speaks. Today I have an exceptional guest with me. I am bringing one of my co-stars and co-authors of the Triumph in the Trenches anthology, Phillip Woolfolk. He is such a phenomenal guest because he is a wealth of knowledge of everything financial literacy. Phillip Woolfolk is an economic development strategist, author, and advocate for Black economic empowerment. He served on the Governor Murphy's transition team. Yes, you heard that right, transition team, and leads Main Street Advisory LLC. And he also works with the African American Chambers of Commerce for New Jersey. His chapter in Triumph in the Trenches challenges communities to leverage collective economic power for systematic change. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring the big man himself, Phillip Woolfolk, to the stage, and he's going to share just some gems that's going to really take us to the next level. Welcome, Phillip. I'm so happy to have you here on this episode of Triumph with RDB Speaks.
Thanks for having me, Doctor. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So I gave a brief overview about you, but share just a little bit more about you, the big Jersey man himself, doing everything financial literacy. Just give the audience a little snippet of what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, absolutely. Well, by way of background, I've served in a number of different capacities over the years in the private sector, public sector, charter schools. I spent about 25 years in the banking industry, where I ended my career as a vice president, fair lending manager, responsible for fair lending compliance. In the nonprofit world, I've served as a chairman of the board of trustees for a charter school, treasurer for the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey, and later served as the chief administrative officer for the charter school, and then later served as chief operations officer for the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey from May of 2021 through May of 2024. Then I went back to my consulting practice, which is Main Street Advisory LLC. And then because I had an interest in speaking and writing and wanted to become an author, I launched Phillip Speaks LLC. And that is where I met you and some other fantastic individuals, where we worked on Triumph in the Trenches, Navigating Success for Black Professionals as our first joint venture, then Volume 2, and now we're knee deep in Volume 3. I also have another project that I'm working on that's coming to conclusion. I spoke with a group recently, probably a couple of months ago, a rebirth project, really centering around transformation and how folks can transform their lives to a better place. And that rebirth project is yielding another anthology, and that will probably launch sometime in November. I'm also a real estate investor. Started my real estate investing career back when I was about 23 years old, and I grew that business to a point where at the age of 43, I was able to walk away from a six-figure income position and stock options and bonuses to spend about 5 years home with my wife and my daughters, traveling, camping, and just enjoying ourselves. So life has been good. And now what I do with a lot of my time is work with people as a business coach, helping folks to really upscale their businesses to get themselves in a financial position that can get them to a place where they're able to have some freedom and be able to live the life that they want to live, and be able to also build a legacy and share some of that wealth with their families, their communities, and all that good stuff. So that's where life is for me now, and also have my solo book project that I'm working on with our supreme publisher, Ilona Washington, and that will probably be out sometime in the middle of next year.
All right. Listen, I already told you all. This man is a not only is he a gem, but he's a king in all right, wearing many crowns. And so I'm just so happy to have you here today, and share you with my audience.
Thank you.
And you are definitely going to keep everybody busy. So we're going to be checking for you. If you haven't already and you don't know, please head to his website, www.phillipwoolfolk.com. I'm going to keep dropping it throughout the episode so that the audience can follow you and get to know you and learn more about what you do. But
Absolutely.
in the meantime, I want us to talk a little bit about these disparities that's going on. So we know that racial disparities in government contracting reveal systematic exclusion of Black owned businesses from public sector opportunities. You spoke a lot about that within the book in your chapters. And in New Jersey and nationally, the gap between contracts awarded to white owned various minority owned and various not minority owned businesses is staggering. Often representing billions of lost economic opportunities. And I've been doing my research because I was like, I had to be prepared for when you came on here. So, in looking at some of the contracts, I noticed that black businesses receive approximately 3.3 million, while white businesses secured $10.8 billion. And let's just let those numbers sink in for the audience. The difference between 3.3 million dollars that approximately Black owned businesses have been receiving in comparison to their counterpoints at $10.8 billion. And federal contracting, despite making up 13% of the population, Black owned businesses receive less than 2% of federal contracts. So the math is just not mathing, right? The math is just not mathing. And that's what we're here to talk about and allow you to share your expertise and background in that, because and knowing how the math just doesn't lie. I want to think about, Phillip, let's sit with these numbers for a second, like 3.3 million versus 10.8 billion. That's right. Not a gap. Like, that is a canyon. Like, that's not a gap. That's a canyon. That's not
significant.
Right. So that's not just oversight. That's intentional design. And within your chapter, you literally were sitting in the room with the work that you do, right? Sitting in the room where these decisions are often being made. Like, what was the moment you realized that FARA just wasn't a talking point? Like, and knowing these cycles just don't end.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you know what's interesting, Doc, is that the disparity study covered the period of in New Jersey. The New Jersey disparity study was from 2015 through 2020. The Black community in New Jersey elected the current administration to the tune of about 94% of the Black vote for the first term and about 96% of the Black vote during the second term. And so there was a significant amount of time over that roughly 8-year period to really be able to create something that would be a lot fairer, even through executive orders. And to that end, the disparity study was released during the second term, almost midways, I think, in terms of the second term. And so the priority of having that delivered during the first term just wasn't there. And then in addition to that, the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey and their disparity task force created some recommendations based on best practices across the country, using some of the models of what's going on, like in New York, right across the Hudson, in terms of what they've been able to do to ramp up the participation levels of African Americans and other minorities in the state of New York. Those recommendations have really fallen on deaf ears. Not much have happened in terms of movement on that. The recommendations that have been made as it relates to the governor's ability to put forth executive orders to be able to make some of this a little better for the African American community and other minorities that are on the short end of the stick. With regard to public contracts, just has not been done. So, one of the things I say to folks is that we have to do a better job of really communicating what's important to us economically, and as we participate in the political process, to make sure that folks that we're voting for are coming to the table with something that is beneficial to us. And if they don't really achieve those benchmarks during their first term, there's certainly no reason to elect them to a second term of office to basically mistreat our community in the way that they have been. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is, as you look at the Black community in terms of consumer spend, as of 2024, I think we spent something like $1.8 trillion. Mm-hmm. And so we're also, as consumers, putting a lot of resources into the marketplace, into the economy, and those businesses that are on the receiving end of our dollars economically, a lot of them are also not treating us in the way that we should be treated. So we have to be a lot more intentional about how we handle ourselves at the ballot box, and I think also how we handle ourselves at the cash register and who we're spending our money with. And if we were spending that money, if we were a country, for example, we would be in the top 10 based on gross national product, or GDP. And so we just have to make some major adjustments in terms of how we spend, how we invest, and really begin to invest more of our resources into our own communities, our own shops, our own stores, begin to manufacture more of what we use, as opposed to purchasing so much from other communities that really don't do anything for us.
And you raised some phenomenal points there, and I want to touch back on. So I want to check in and make sure our listeners are understanding. So listeners, I need you to hear this clearly. Your state government has spent $3 million on Black-owned businesses and $10 billion on their counterparts with your tax dollars. Now, ask yourself, really ask yourself, when's the last time you held your elected officials accountable for where your money goes? And as Phillip just so blatantly and eloquently shared, we have to be intentional about the way we spend our money, where we're spending our money, and how we're spending our money. And so this brings me back to, as you were saying in your book, how the cycle never ends. In your chapter, you talked about how your grandmother taught you hard work opens doors, but you discovered a system that saw you as just another overqualified minority. You broke one cycle, but found yourself trapped in another. When does breaking cycles actually lead to freedom? Can you talk a bit about that?
Oh, sure. Well, just to make a minor correction, it was my mother that taught us more about economics. My mother was a crossing guard, and she basically, when she got paid, she would have a series of envelopes, and each envelope identified what the payment was for. So there'd be an envelope for rent, there'd be an envelope for groceries, there'd be an envelope for other things, utilities and all that. And so we would count out what needed to be paid for each envelope, and what was left was what was left, right? and so my mother did not believe in credit in the sense that we do in terms of credit cards and whatnot. She came up during the layaway plan days, right? And so you go into a store, you see something you want, furniture or whatever the case may be, you put down a $50 deposit, and then you pay something on it every week or two until it was paid for, and then they deliver it to your house. And so we grew up with that kind of philosophy of basically pretty much staying out of debt in terms of traditional loans. The other thing is that for me, my economic or my banking career started at a pretty early age. I would say around 9 or 10 years old, I was saving my money from my little side hustles between shining shoes and running errands and, cleaning up yards and doing different things for neighbors, shoveling snow in the wintertime. And all that money got put in a can. And and then I would lend money to my parents' friends. And so if I lent you, $10 on payday, you had to pay me back 15. So I was an early stage
Mhm.
payday lender, and in retrospect, my interest rates were just as atrocious as they are now. And so that's how I got my start, and so I got some clarity and understanding about finances and how to make money, how to make it grow, and all those things at a pretty early age.
Awesome. I love that idea. From when you being a child to now, it's a wonder why you're the go-to guru for anything financial literacy, right? Because you started at such a young age. As we begin to pivot a little bit, I want us to think about the Hempstead Act of Legacy and how 270 million acres were given to white settlers, right, and European immigrants. However, descendants of enslaved people got nothing, and we know this historically. Why do why do even progressive white people recoil at reparations when the government has done repeatedly given reparations to others, for banks and for oil industries, for foreign wars. But however, when it comes to minorities, or when it specifically to black and brown, it's like a jolting thing. It's such a this shock, or the purse is clenched so tightly. Why do you believe that is?
Well, I think, psychologically, a lot of this goes back to us being enslaved, and I think there are some folks out there who basically still view us as less than, and view us as inferior, and view us in lots of ways that does not put us on par with other folks that do receive their various support in various ways. I mean, look at some of the conflicts going on around the world. We've sent billions of dollars to various places in support of various causes, and when it comes to supporting those folks at home who helped build this country, there seems to be some fog around whether or not the resources are there to do that. We tend to find the resources to support whatever it is we want to support. I mean, take a look at the more recent, at the pandemic as an example. There were trillions of dollars invested in keeping businesses open, keeping businesses, to the point where they didn't have to close and shut down, and supporting the corporate structure. And those dollars materialize from somewhere, and when it comes to something like reparations and reimbursing a generations later of enslaved and for our ancestors, basically for the free labor, there seems to be some fog around whether or not that's the right thing to do. There needs to be, anytime I hear about it, there's usually someone that will say there needs to be some sort of study, and the study needs to take place, and then they need to do whatever. But it seems like when there are other disasters around the globe and America wants to get involved in it, the study period is one legislative session and a vote. And so I'm not sure why, after hundreds of years of us being behind the eight ball economically, due to lots of free labor by our ancestors, that someone needs to study that. When you look at the home ownership rate, for example, the wealth gap between black and white, the significance of it typically boils down to whether or not you own a home or not. And so the home ownership rate for us is relatively low by comparison, and that creates part of the wealth gap. You have as we talked about in our first book, navigating Triumph in the Trenches, Navigating Success for Black Professionals. One of the things that was uncovered there is, and universally across all industries and for-profit, nonprofit, U.S., outside of the U.S., that people of African descent tend to be below the behind the eight ball as it relates to systemic racism, other microaggressions and other barriers that we face in the workplace, and there's no mistaking the fact that regardless of educational level, that we also tend to be behind the eight ball and lower paid and compensated than others. And you look at the more recent over 300,000 African American women out of work and out of the workforce, that particular demographic tends to be the highest educated of all Americans, and yet there's trouble getting employment. There's trouble getting compensated on the same level as their peers, and so this whole idea of systemic racism and microaggressions, people look at those things as these are things we should just get over. The problem with it and the inability to get over it is because we're living it every day. This is not something that just happened in the past, and slavery was over 400 years ago, and we're able to get over it because everything is equal now, right? But even if you look at some of the laws that have been passed around things like education, we're still dealing with the whole separate but equal. And we're finding that in urban communities across the country, the educational system is still separate and still unequal. And so there are lots of different barriers that are in our path that keep us from getting to where we should be. And we have to do a better job of holding those elected officials accountable for that. And we have to stop voting for people who like to show up for the camera opportunity, but you don't see them again till election day or the campaign for the next election. And that stuff that happens in the middle does not necessarily benefit us. The only beneficial thing that happens for our community is that there's this. I often say there's money in poverty, and what we tend to do is they base how much support specific areas are going to get based on how many children are eligible for free and reduced lunch, how many people are receiving public assistance, and all those kinds of statistics. Whereas if some of those dollars were adequately invested in education and training and certification and getting folks certified in certain real positions that allow them to pull themselves up economically. Even when I look at the trades, for example, when I was in school, from middle school to high school, we had exposure to all the different trades. And so I graduated from high school with folks who went into plumbing and electrical and auto mechanics, auto body, and those folks, based on those trades, were able to earn a decent income to be able to take care of their families. And then somehow, miraculously, universally across the country, all those trades were removed from the public school system and placed in community colleges. So now you have to graduate from high school to then go and figure out, which of those trades do you think you might be interested in? So it's to me, it's a systemic process to maintain the status quo, and based on that process, there are people that remain below the economic wealth line in terms of basically being reduced to a lifetime of poverty.
Oh my goodness, that was so well put. And you not answered, but you brought up so many questionable things that we continue to face time after time, decade after decade. Like the mask keeps changing.
Right.
but what's behind the mask remains the same, and so in bringing that too, I just want us to take a moment to think about, like you mentioned in the book, these 10 steps, right? And so you provided a concrete action plan of what it's like to invest 50% of your discretionary income, max out for your 401k, and then start a business, right? So what does that look like when you live beneath your means? And we know that right now so many individuals are living above their means because they're trying to keep up with social media, and they're trying to keep up what they see everyone else, or what society says
Right.
they should be looking at. But we want to think about, what does it mean to actually build unity, and invest in Africa, and invest in your family, invest in your well-being and your legacy. These things require discipline and education. We know that, right? But what does it look like for the individual who doesn't know where to start? How do we build the infrastructure and financial literacy programs, investment collectives, mentorship, to make these things accessible to everyone? Because not just we believe, you and I and those of our other professionals who are in this world just trying to rebuild, or what our communities look like. We know what it looks like, but what do you say? How do you put this out there to those who may not have that access to some of the things that we know? Where do they start?
Well, I think where you have to start is, everybody has to start from where they are. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the key things is to have a change in terms of mindset, right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. George Fraser. He's an author and speaker, and an individual who's probably in his 80s now, that's been around for a long time, speaking truth to power, and also really in the economic space of what we should be doing or could be doing to better our positions. One of the things he says that I find interesting is that, poor people stay poor by pretending to be rich. And wealthy people stay wealthy and get wealthier by pretending to be poor. Mm-hmm. And so what does that mean? To me, what it means is, if you are economically in a situation where you have a decent job, you're making a decent pay, you're renting an apartment or a house, you're not an owner yet, so you have no equity, then when it comes to buying a car, for example, in my opinion, you shouldn't go out and get a car and lease a car for $1,000 a month. And yet I see in lower moderate income communities all the time really upscale, expensive vehicles, and yet people in some of those communities are not owners. And so if you're not an owner, you're not building equity, your wealth position is diminished because you're purchasing.
Phillip, can you believe it's been 30 minutes already and you have dropped so many gems? But guess what? Guess what, listeners? Phillip is coming back for a part 2 so we can learn some more about financial literacy and how to triumph it financially. So stay tuned, stay updated, and we're looking forward to sharing more on Triumph with Reverend Dr. Xenia.